Alright guys, so today we're going to go over the IPM chart, example flow chart. We're going to get more in depth into the map assignment as well as just using Google Draw. So the first thing I wanted to cover, here you'll see the IPM chart. So what this is displaying, what IPM actually stands for, is introduce, practice, and master. So think about these with mechanics. And then across the top here, you'll notice numbers. These could be levels. In our instance, we may want to think about it in terms of an area. So as a team, in the final ending portion of this, you'll have one level, and then each one of these could be numbered areas that you could introduce mechanics, allow the player to practice them, and then master them further. So you'll notice that there's a slight curve that comes into play, and this is what you want. That's what you're looking for, to have your player being introduced to new things all along the way, but then also being able to practice those ones he's already learned as well as being able to master them. So this was an example right out of a final project team. This game it's called Carbon Copy. It was all about making clones of yourself, and there was a boom clone, a derp clone, and a poof clone, and they all had different abilities and were used in different ways. So this team had a really good job of laying out their mechanics and very easily planning for them. So when you're working on a level, if you were on a large team working on a level with this, you would read this from the top down. So if Frank was assigned to level 4, we would have to make sure that he's mastering the pressure pad and the doors and gates, and then allowing the player to practice the lever and the springboard, right? So level 6, for example, you would have to have mastered these introductory mechanics as well as starting to master the lever, practice the crusher, and then now we're introducing the boom clone for the first time. So you can see how you can plan all this out, and then you read it left to right when you're looking at an individual mechanic, but you read it from top down when you're starting to actually implement these levels individually. So this is a very well done example, minus the fact it says imp chart. That's the only mistake on this image right there. But so start to think about this for your own individual area. So those minor setups that you have been working on in your LDD, as well as portions of the major ones, think about where you can introduce, practice, and master mechanics in your own areas. So the reason that we were talking about this is I'd like to see this being pushed further inside of the flowchart. So over here in the flowchart example, let me make it a little bit bigger. Uh, over here in my notes, I'm very clearly indicating which mechanics it is that the player is going to be being introduced to, as well as practicing, as well as a few being mastered. So as you're going through and blocking out each individual area, start to note this stuff down and even make it into a chart like that if you'd like to. But make sure you're planning it out so you're introducing new mechanics all the way throughout the entire area and giving a player an opportunity to have something a bit more challenging. So going through the LDDs and reading through all of them between you guys as well as the online students, a thing I see that's very common is overscoping, but that's a good portion, good thing. Rather be too overscoped than underscoped, and also having too much variety in terms of a mechanic. So think about one thing you can introduce to the player, whatever it may be, and give multiple different instances of using that mechanic. Frank, you did a really good job at that. I saw you had using the water and the fire in different ways, and you're reusing that in different ways without introducing too many different things. So try and stay away from having multiple different mechanics that you're spreading yourself over. You don't want to have just use it once and now never do it again. And that's where the IPM chart can definitely help you to make sure you're avoiding doing that. So just try and come up with one or two, maybe three mechanics that are really solid, and then have instances of those where the player is introduced to them as well as a little bit more challenging once they've understood those, and then blend them together, right? So then you get to a scenario where the player knows about the derp clone and the boom clone, or they know about using a lever and avoiding a crusher. So using those in combination with each other now creates a whole new set of mechanics. All right, so for the flowchart, one thing that may be a little confusing in the instructions going from the flowchart to the map itself is the flowchart asks for 5 collectibles, and those are supposed to be your the ones that the player is required to get, or some type of interaction or item that the player needs to do to move forward. So those are the major ones, and then inside of the map assignment, it asks you for 15. And we want them to be very clearly detailed into what each one of those are, but those can be smaller, minor setups that are along the player's main path, but don't necessarily need to be collected. So I've definitely gotten some questions on that, and it may seem a little confusing, but you don't have to go into depth for every single collectible in the flowchart. Just think about the core ones, the ones that may take a little bit more time to implement, but are still minor setups and still important to the actual progression. So in here you'll notice, this is very similar to the flowcharting you've done before in other classes. I know GD1 you've basically introduced to flowcharting, and you do a lot of it there. You'll notice we're using a lot of the same symbols, but this is a different take on it. So each one of these rectangles here is used for an interactive area, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a physical space, right? So looking at my flowchart, the player starts over here and ends up to the right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what your map is. I can come in here and start moving these around as whole objects. I don't think I can grab everything at once, but group them all. Let me delete this. So the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to keep them in a linear path. It could be vertical, it could be a zigzag. There's no congruent flow to this. This is just your mechanics being laid out from one to the next. Format. Right click on it. Yeah, it's trying to control marquee click. So this could very well be down here. This transition would be this way. And then this control room over here could be over here. And then there's really no right or wrong layout for this. And this is all that this is just showing your mechanics as they go through. And then you can start to make these little modular areas like this and rearrange them. So this is where you can do some of your prototyping and your designing. This is the design portion. Once you got your map finalized and your mechanics laid out and you get into Unity, you're implementing at that point. You're going to make design changes. Things are going to be adapted, and you still have to make choices, but this is where a lot of the design comes in. So, start to rearrange these. Well, what happened if the player comes out of the closet and they go right to the control room and they have all these tasks, and then they get to the generator? How does that change the gameplay? Is that better or is that worse? Right? And you can notice that this isn't by any means a layout of this. I could have the elevator. I could have the elevator down here, and now this is branching off to two different directions, maybe left and right. So I have this over here.
Or you could even change that and make it not branch. Just make it linear.
Yeah. Maybe the stairs go back down to the control room in one way, and the elevator allows them to progress. So this is just a complete exercise to start to mess with your mechanics as well as build them out in terms of how they're going to progress, but then also being able to plan out everything you're going to have in place. Same things with the icons. Right now you're just placing these icons in these interactive areas, But when you go to build your actual map, you can have this open right next to it and know exactly what icons you need, what you're planning for in each section, and it's going to be a lot clearer in your head, and that's going to allow you to put it down onto your map even better and more clear. And what that allows is other designers, other developers, other people on your team able to look at it and read it and understand what your vision is. And that's what's so important from a design perspective, is being able to communicate all of those ideas and communicate that vision to everybody. So really take this exercise seriously. It definitely has a good weight to your overall grade. It's pretty heavy. So really play with a few different layouts and don't get stuck in this left to right mentality. The player starts on the left and they end up on the right. And we've seen that a lot as well, going from this flowchart assignment to the map. Students will end up with the flow chart is left to right, and then their map ends up. The player starts on the left and ends on the right. Maybe that's partially because of how the flow chart example is, and they're just going ahead and trying to recreate this, but with their own setups. So don't necessarily think that this is any visual representation of how your level is, but think of it more in terms of what mechanics are going on and how you can push that further. So you'll notice, like right in the beginning, um, I just have a very simple setup where the collectible is right near the player on a shelf. They turn to the left or slightly behind them and they can see a collectible. That's just introducing it to the player. Maybe there's a sound effect, so now they can start to associate this sound with this collectible. And then you'll notice further on, I have an example like in the elevator, it's hidden up inside the ceiling. And I think here also in the staircase, there's a platforming puzzle where they have to jump on a broken wall and find a collectible behind there. So same thing, right? Still a collectible, but there I'm pushing it a little bit further. It's a little bit more challenging. The player has to hunt for it, and they're rewarded for their actions as a player. Same thing goes for finding and using objects as one of my mechanics, as well as puzzle solving. Um, that may sound generic, but that's in my mind, that's where you get to fill in the blank, right? This is just an example, something that you can push further and customize to what your setups are, what you're thinking of, and really try to get as detailed as possible. Definitely be sure to in here include your featured asset, and make sure you have some depth in here, something um, that is going on from beginning to end, that is tying everything together as an entire objective. And then really, I know that the timing thing is one thing I know that's challenging to guesstimate, and how to figure out how long your actual gameplay is. So really keep in mind that 10-second rule that you may have read about, and it's definitely mentioned in the map assignment. You don't want the player to be going more than 10 seconds without any type of gameplay interaction. So it's definitely better to overestimate how long it's going to take some players to complete some things, test it out, and then you can cut it back. I know I've seen some of these that were submitted were in the 10-minute to 50-minute range to complete this area. But keep in mind, we're looking for 2 to 4 minutes of gameplay. So if you think they're going to come into my control room here, this is 75 seconds, that's still a long time. If my communication isn't well, or the area is too large, if there's too much going on, it's too complex, this may end up taking more about 2 to 3 minutes just in and of itself. So really try and come down to a really strong estimate what you think it's going to take for each one of these areas, and estimate those minor setups to be about 10 seconds of gameplay, right? Small little interactions for the player that in an ideal playthrough, a player's not screwing around or trying to break the game. They're going through and progressing, and they're getting feedback and accomplishing the tasks how you want them to. It should be about that 2 to 4 minute range. So has anybody taken a look at this flowchart assignment yet, or started it all? Have any questions about what we're working on in the flowchart?
Are we gonna be able to download a template with all these little stuff and things?
Yeah, there is a template in the actual assignment.
You're gonna be using this template for 3 months too.
Yeah, so this template is the exact same for the map, except I just added these flowchart icons to get you moving in the right direction. And these are very similar to what you've seen already. And yeah, so feel free to use these as well as make any other icons that you would like. You can make them for your flowchart and as well as use them in your map as well. Any other questions? Kyle, Damien? No? So you may have seen this. This was introduced to you guys in the LDD assignment. Very, very helpful document. One thing that I've definitely seen throughout the last year of teaching this class and working in the game scraps is these are definitely repeatable, as well as once you know that they're a problem and you start to recognize it, it's very easy to change it and fix it. But it's definitely about iteration, right? So when you make your first map or you design out your first few areas and all these mechanics, it's not going to be perfect. If you think you don't need to make changes, then you're definitely going to have a wake-up call when you have to make iterations to games. I'm sure you've learned that already through Game Design 1. When you make your game, you play test it the first time, you're like, wow, that was terrible. So what can I do to make it better? What do I like about it? What can I change to make it a better experience? So a few of these that we definitely see a lot. I'm just going to cover a few of these that are good talking points, and then you can read through the rest at your own leisure if you haven't already. So big empty areas. Some games do this really well, where they have these big open worlds, and there is a lot of interaction, even though it is large and there may be a lot of walking or driving or just transportation. There is a lot of dense gameplay, but for a student project and for the time we have, you don't want to spread yourselves out too much, right? You want to create an interesting, dense experience so you can hand this off to a potential employer. They can play it for a minute, 90 seconds, or maybe it's just someone in HR that's has to play through all these and look at all these demo reels and look at all these websites and portfolios and choose the ones that are best for their manager to take a look at. So you really want to make sure the work you're doing is going to be seen and it's not spread out too far. So there'll definitely be time to work on these larger games in the future, but for now we really want to focus on smaller, denser experiences. And this image right here is a really great example of that. What's up?
Can't see it at all.
Can't see it?
Not at all. Everybody has to just look at it on your own computer. Maybe a good idea.
It's pretty hard to see as it is on our computers.
Yeah, it's a little dark, but yeah, it's totally invisible up there.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Well, anyway, this image was actually taken right from a student's assignment, and this was back when we were in Unreal, so not too long ago actually. Let's see if I can adjust this.
Wow.
How's that?
Nice job.
Game art for the win. Brightness.
I didn't know Google could do that.
Yeah, that is pretty sweet.
That's pretty sweet.
All right, so what's really awesome about this was this taken right from a student's assignment, and this really was a transformative experience in terms of what he had submitted. So his very first build, his alpha milestone, was just an L hallway, completely empty, not much going on in it at all. So you could just walk straight down, make a left, walk to the door, you're done. That was that was where we were at. And the feedback we had given was, you need more going on. You need there to be some type of interaction and some type of traversal or engage the player to prevent them from just holding W and walking forward, right? So he really took that to heart and made a bunch of changes, and it showed, right? So right from the beginning in this image, you can see that you have this walkway over the top and this barrier in front of you. So you couldn't proceed forward, so you climb up the ladder, move forward, and jump down on the other side. Right there you see a fire hazard, so you have to either, deal with it or avoid it. Whatever you would feel like in that scenario is totally acceptable. And then move forward. There's some crates, and there was another setup where you had to stack them over to jump over something else. So, and then there's also a little like walkway up top there. So a lot really transformed, and this is just adding in some traversal elements, right? So once you add that traversal and then layer mechanics on that, it goes even further. So really, really good example of what we're looking for in terms of density. So when we say dense, that's what we want to see is don't excuse me, don't allow the player to walk 20 to 30 seconds between your setups, right? That's too long. A lot of studies lately have said that humans have close to the same attention span as a goldfish, right? Like we live in a very digital age where there's a lot of information going back and forth, and texting is an immediate response, and it's definitely affecting people's behavior. So, and the same thing goes for in any type of media and any type of interactive experience. You have to hold that player's attention. If they're walking for too long, or they're just doing something that's not keeping them engaged, it's going to very quickly drop off in your users. So don't spread yourselves out too much. So another really great one I definitely want to mention is one room, one item to collect. So definitely see a lot of times where you're making some type of hospital or school or some type of office building, and there's a janitor's closet. You open the door, there's a collectible, you grab it, and you leave. Right? Like opening the door isn't an interaction. It's just some type of function that you do every day to leave this room. Right? So try and make it a lot better experience and really put the focus on getting that item. So rather than having to open a door, maybe the player has to, bless you, maybe the player has to blow a wall open, or they need to move a grate out of the way, and there's a collectible hidden in a vent. So some type of interaction is much better than just walking into a room, grabbing an item, and leaving, right? So when was the last time you went into your room, grabbed your keys, and left, and was like, man, that was awesome. I had a great time doing that, right? So try and push yourselves to come up with these interesting experiences and different creative setups using the tools we have available to us. And that will definitely tie into what I mentioned there about grabbing the keys. That definitely ties right into literal key and lock setups. So anyone that has a literal key that you want the player to collect, and that definitely includes a key card, even a crowbar, still doing the same thing. Those types of things, really stay away from that stuff. And the reason why is it's very, very, it's very, very, it's very, very. How do I want to say this? It's very used.
Low-hanging fruit?
What's that?
Low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one way to say it. And just from the, yeah, there you go. And it's been done over and over in video games from the beginning of when they became a big entertainment boom. But now we want to take that even further and show other creative ways to do that same thing.
Yeah,
So
I'd say part of that is that we're a game design degree. So part of what we want to do is show that we're awesome game designers. So anyone can come up with red key, red lock. We're supposed to be better than that.
exactly. And then also just the creative vision of scraps, right? The game scraps is much more of a realistic vision in terms of art style. So having a key that would be um, fitting in this world would be very difficult for us to see and find. So it'd be very small, maybe a credit card size key card on a desk, not very easy for the player to see. So that makes it tough to actually guide the player to that. As well as if we wanted to make it visible, make it large and goofy or cartoonish in style, that's not going to fit in the creative vision. So really stay away from that and come up with more metaphorical senses for those setups that you have some type of locked barrier and some other type of solution. All right, so not guiding the player is something you want to immediately start thinking about when you're building your map, because those are the times where you're going to give the player uh, actual feedback, and it's going to be important for the actual gameplay. So if you plan that out in the map, like when the player gets to this point, there's going to be a volume and there's going to be an audio voiceover, and it's going to tell them this about the story, this about the backstory, and then it's also going to tell them this about the goal or the task at hand. Giving them that information all on the map is going to make your lives so much easier when you are planning it out and building it inside of Unity. And think about all types of feedback, right? So there's definitely information you can put to the player on the HUD, as well as uh, giving them that audio voiceover or sound effects. Same thing goes for any type of visual effects, right? So maybe you want to have some type of material on effect when you get near an item, right? So you could have when the player comes up to an object, press E to interact with thing, or you just have some type of material like an outline on something, or it changes color, some visual representation of press a button to interact. Giving that player the information is very important, and if you plan for that and you start to think about that, how you're going to build that out, it's going to help you when you go to actually construct your map. Um, area inconsistency. I see that a lot more in between student areas than I do in an entire area, but this is definitely important thing to just keep in mind. And this is where some of that IPM mechanics can come into where you can maybe you're introducing platforming to the player where they can make jumps, so you don't have too punishing of a jump, but then later on you have a bit more challenging of a jump where they need to first set up something with a rigid body with the grav null and then create complete the puzzle from there. So you don't want to have it backwards where you have your harder one up front and then the more the more simpler one towards the end. You want to have good pacing there. So make sure that you have that consistency between your assets as well as just the setups that you're going for. Let's see, walking through halls, opening doors is a very good one. That definitely ties much more into the one room, one item to collect. It's definitely very boring, and it's been done over and over, and it's not any type of task that is going to show off your game design skills. Dark Souls, that's one of Dax's favorite games, right?
Not Dark Souls.
So the reason that's there is that just goes into saying, what's your target audience? Who are you designing this experience for? If it's those hardcore gamers, those ones that don't mind that, you know, getting so far in a game and then dying, and now you're set back so much amount of time or so much effort that you've put in. That's a completely different market than what you're designing this experience for. You want to target those uh, those people that are going to hire you that may not be the best gamers or hardcore gamers, as people like to say. So really trying to come up with an experience that just is fun and enjoyable for anyone. So don't make it too challenging, and it's something that's hard to do, especially when you're there working on your own project, and you, as the designer, you know how to play it because you've built it. So it's hard for you to see where the flaws are, or where it's too difficult. So start simple and give it to players and see what their reaction is, and then take it further from there. But don't start out so difficult that players get frustrated. And that's definitely something that's not easy to pick up on right away, but it's something you have to work through and start to understand that everyone that's playing it is experiencing it for the first time, and they have all different skill ranges, so you have to try and accommodate to those skill ranges as best as you can. So any of these on here, just looking at them, not really clear on what they mean, or you guys want to talk about any of them?
My thing is the instant kills. After reading through that, that was kind of like the idea, but what about 2 or 3 times the player gets hit and now they're down? Is that good then?
Yeah, that's fine. Two or three times before the player dies is definitely acceptable. Also, there are some scenarios where instant kills aren't necessarily wrong. So maybe you have some type of platforming, or the player's like out on the side of a building that if they jump and they miss the platform, they fall to their death and respawn, but they respawn right there. In my opinion, that's okay, right? Because there's really no other way to. You're not going to have the player fall all the way to the ground. Now they have to climb back up the building and then make the jump again. Think of more of the instant kills for like the turrets, right? You don't want to set the turrets to max damage, so you get hit by one bullet, you're dead. That's just going to be frustrating to deal with. So those types of things, I definitely have some wiggle room. Are you okay with setups like that, like I described, where?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to what's your point?
Yeah.
Why?
Okay,
And
so
it goes either way.
I already have a proposition on that one as part of the level mechanic to stop a player. So player encounters obstacle. If player tries to run through it without, like, if it is inherently dangerous to the player, and I don't want the player just running through it and bypassing whatever I've got set up,
Mm-hmm.
then
Yeah.
instant kill.
There you go. See, that and the reason that's okay is because of the thought process going into it. It's not instant kill is good or bad. It's that if you're walking, and believe me, we've seen this plenty of times. There's map design. I open the door, go in, rocks fall on the player character's head, he's dead. Like, well, why? What did the player do wrong? Like, no, I just set it up. It's a trap. It's cool. Kills him. That's not good. But if you say there's this setup that I really feel is important for the player to see, it's an integral part of the game, it's the mechanics I want the player to learn, maybe it's something they need to do later on to solve something more important. I can't let them go. That's called the gatekeeper. I can't let them go past that. There's a few methods you could do that. One is like a quote-unquote locked door. Another is a kill. Another is like invisible walls or internal monologues. There's lots of methodology to get there that aren't necessarily instant kills,
Mm-hmm.
but get you the same thing. And really, it's the underlying reasoning that's the important part of that.
So player sees hallway of fire, player needs to overcome hallway of fire. I don't want player just running through hallway of fire.
Correct.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, so you don't want, and then that definitely ties into the feedback you're giving the player, right? You don't want them to just touch that trigger, touch that volume, and now they're dead and they respawn back. You want to, make it so the player can step in it, take some damage, but they can't proceed forward. So it's about balancing that damage volume and where that collider is, to making sure that they have a chance to take some damage and back out and say, okay, I can't go forward, and balancing it out that way. And then tying in that feedback, so having, a sound effect that they understand they are taking damage, having all that in place, and maybe when they respawn, there's a voiceover that tells them, that fire was hot, maybe I shouldn't touch it. Things like that to really give that communication, make it clear to players, and you can always dial it back, right? So at first, I like to just have so much feedback on there that it should be very apparent what it is you want to do, and then you can start to pull away some of that, and then to give the player some chance to discover those things that you want and not hold their hand as much.
Do you have time there for the Austin Powers?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. You're good. You're definitely a
I
good
love this.
analogy.
All right, so this is on the same topic, but this is a a speech I've given, I don't know how many hundreds of times now. So, and this goes directly to difficulty, player communication. Everybody seen Austin Powers in your kids, I assume? No?
I've seen like
You've seen it
bits and
now?
pieces.
Okay, good. So because we're gonna talk about pretty much the most famous scene. So there's a scene where Dr. Evil, who's the big bad guy, captures Austin, and he's got him captured. And Scott Evil, his son, comes out and is like, let's shoot him in the head. And Dr. Evil's like, no, you can't shoot him in the head. He's like, why? We got him right here. We got a gun, we got a guy, just shoot him in the head. We're done. And Dr. Evil says, no, we're going to put him in this room over this tank with sharks with lasers on their head. And what are we as the audience thinking at that point?
He's gonna get away.
He's going to get away. We know he's going to get away. We know this is an overcomplicated plan. It's a silly plan. It looks good, but we know he should just shoot him in the head if he wants to shoot him in the head. So for your entire life playing games, you have been Austin Powers, and you're going to get away. It's set up, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but every accomplishment you've made in a single-player video game has been fake. It was set up by designers for you to complete it purposely. They knew they were going to lose. They knew you were going to save the princess. You're going to rule the world. You're going to be the king. We know that. That's just a glimpse behind the curtain. So what you have been is Austin Powers. There is a tendency as young designers to want to be Scott Evil. Like, I'm going to get that player. I'm going to kill them in one shot. They don't do what I want. I'm going to light them on fire. I'm going to throw them in a pit because that's revenge for all the times that all the designers did that to me. Actually, what you need to be is Dr. Evil. We're there to fail. The player wins, but we got to make it look good. We got to put the lasers on the shark heads and put them over the tank with the tying up and like the countdown timer. And but we know they're going to get away. That's the whole point. Does that make sense? That has been like the clearest analogy I can give to young designers of this is what we should be doing. And that kind of like, that goes really a lot across a lot of game design. We're not there competing with the players because we can win. All we have to do is put in a locked door and we won. They can't complete it. But what we want to do is make it look like they haven't accomplished it. Right?
Very well said.
I've given that a lot.
All right, so any other questions about the common mistakes? You guys have a good sense of what this document is for, so keep this in mind, right? So if you think that you're completely done with your map and you're ready to ready to get it reviewed, or ready to share it with others and see what feedback is, take a look at these yourself and compare it side by side with your map and really give it a good run through. And I've definitely seen changes like these made can definitely just have a big impact on the level or the quality of the area you're working on, and then that will just really tie into the grade, right? So don't be so focused on I have to make this map great, I need to make it perfect to get a good grade. Think about it in terms of you need to make the map well to make a good level, right? So if you take a map that's just average or mediocre and you bring that into Unity, what do you think your level is going to be? Yeah, exactly. It's going to be average or mediocre. So that's where the design is. So if you really push yourselves to make improvements on the map, make adjustments, make a lot of iterations, it's directly going to impact the quality of the level once you bring it into Unity. All right, so back to this example. I'm going to just pull up this map again. And really we could just take a little bit of time to talk about some just map building techniques. I know there's a video in the part of the map assignment that just explains Google Draw and some of the capabilities of it. Definitely very, very powerful tool, and one that is definitely very useful as well as for collaborating, right? So multiple people can be on one document as they were here, and they're very easily able to work together and collaborate when they're not necessarily in person all the time. So when you're working on your map, definitely want to reiterate just a few things that you have to include. One of them is terrain. So really make sure that you have terrain in some sense. And it can just be anything from, an outdoor area to partially outdoors to maybe you're indoors, you can look out a window and see the terrain. Like I had said before, the reason we're having that so is when you get to the level design class and you start to build your mechanics and start to block out your world, you're able to learn those actual terrain tools, and you'll be tested on those your skills for actual using terrain. So it's important you have terrain in your map in some fashion. When you get to Des 3, the Project and Portfolio 3 class, if you want to cut it out, or maybe as a team you guys come together and make one large terrain for the whole level, that's okay. But just it's important that you have terrain in there so you're able to practice those skills. And then if you want to mark it in some way, it's definitely acceptable. I know we don't have any type of volume for it, so here we have on the legend, you see it? So we have different colors that are representative of, this is actually a team. They made a few more of these custom, but on the template we have one for like fire damage or just damage and a few different ones, but this is a really good example too of a team that went through and made a bunch of custom icons in here to help themselves properly communicate all the information. So if you'd like to, definitely encouraged. Don't just limit yourself to just having a few. Maybe you want to associate a few colors to be your terrain, where it would be maybe you have a dirt portion and you have a pathway that's laid out. So really, really push yourself to get everything down on here, because it's just going to improve your overall quality moving forward. Another common thing I'd see just in terms of building a map that I would just see every month over and over again is trying to build a level inside of a rectangle for some reason. Like you like, okay, my level is this rectangle. Everything I'm doing is in here. So don't really limit yourself to just that space, right? Your level can be any shape, as well as the same thing about just starting left and moving right. Try and avoid that. Really have different heights or have any type of verticality in the level is definitely going to be an improvement to the experience, right? That's a benefit we get from being in 3D, is that we have the ability to climb up things and drop down, and as well as move in the left and right and in the XY plane or the XZ plane. Also being able to traverse up and down definitely adds to the experience. Another thing you definitely want to make sure you have, and it's a showstopper if you don't, in their map there definitely has to be a player start and a player finish. So this area was, this map was a bit different because here they did actually stack all of them on top of each other. So their start and finishes, it looks like they're not connected, but they actually are with these arrows here. So if they're not lined up like that, it's important that you clearly communicate, where the start and ending is. But here you'll notice, like, this is a really great example because he has this small little elevator shaft where the player would come up and finish, and then here was this small little, it's just a hole that they fall into. So it's really important because you guys are making this individually, and later on you're going to be connecting them together to make a team level. It's important that you have these little starting areas, or you're at least planning for them. So think about those little transition points, having a little start and an ending point that you may move around and you may adjust, right? So if you were to imagine connecting another area onto this, it may not fit perfectly. So when you get into Project and Portfolio 3, you may have to make some small little transition areas to connect your areas together, but that's okay, right? You just want to plan for it. So maybe try and avoid things like having your player finish be like out in the open or somewhere where it wouldn't be very accessible to end up. So maybe have it, what?
The center.
Yeah, the center, or they end up in a building in the middle of your area. So try and plan for that so it's very easy to connect them. I know it's not the simplest thing, but just understand that this is starting in one phase and it's going to end up as a whole team. So being able to connect them is definitely important. The 15 collectibles is another big requirement for the map. So really push yourselves to have a variety of different setups, and that's where your mechanics that you're going to be working on and you're going to be implementing in your levels. That's where those will tie directly into your collectibles, right? So having a few right along the player's path is definitely acceptable, but then really include some to reward the player for learning those mechanics, practicing them, and then mastering them, right? So get them warmed up to what the collectibles are and get them wanting to collect more, and then challenge them to get even further.
So we need, so our level should be 2 to 4 minutes long.
Yeah.
And then I'm just thinking like 15 collectibles sounds like a lot to put in to 2 to 4 minutes.
No, not at all.
No, I mean, yeah. So if you think about if you go right in the middle, 3 minutes of gameplay, and then you have 5 collectibles per minute, right? So you have one every 10, one every 12 seconds. What's up, Frank?
Say, for instance, this is one of the things I was considering. Is it acceptable to have, like, one of my collectibles is cash, and there's a safe, and the player has to do X, X, and X to open that safe, and there's 4 or 5 caches in there, whereas normally they just find one cache. The other 5 caches are spread out.
I mean, you definitely want to think about your pacing, right? So it's definitely okay to have, a few in there, or one maybe it's just the same. It's still a cache, but it's visually different. Maybe it's just a large stack, and maybe it's worth some number. It's definitely about balancing and pacing, right? So maybe if you said the player has to complete X, Y, and Z to open up the safe, well, maybe when they've completed X and Y, they collect a cache, to do there. They complete Z, they open up the safe, and now maybe there's 1 or 2 in there. So you want to avoid, and this is definitely something we've seen as well as, all right, you told me to place 15 collectibles. You open the door, there's 15 collectibles laying on the ground, right? So it's like, where does the thought and the creativity that went into it? So I can't definitely say like yes or no to your question of is it okay to have 4 in here. It's about what the rest of the level feels like and the pacing up to that. So if I just walk up to a safe and press E and I open it up and now I got cash, so I got 4 cash, I was like, where was the challenge in that? But if you do make me find the tools, hack into it, and like make me do X, Y, and Z, then it could be definitely acceptable. But it's all about pacing and the balancing to that.
So how long would you say it should take the player to gain a collectible?
You should mix it up.
Like how much? Okay. Right.
Yeah, so there can be some that, so there are a couple reasons you would use collectibles too. There are a couple purposes. One, just like Andrew's been saying, is a reward for doing a task. Any little task that the player does, we want to reward them, keep them like a steady breadcrumb trail. Another way is to lead the player. So if you want the player to go up on a ledge, that may not be apparent. In video games, anything above or below your eye level is very nearly invisible. But if you have a collectible up there that you can see, that's going to let the player know, hey, I can get to that. The other way to use collectibles is to reward the player for doing something a little bit out of the norm. So like if you're doing your testing, making sure you can't get out of world, you're jumping around everywhere, you find you've gotten up on top of a refrigerator that's on top of a ledge. You're like, that's weird that I was even able to get here. Go ahead and put a hidden collectible there because that's cool for the player who does stumble upon that. It's 2 different methodologies, actually 3 different methodologies. You can reward for a task, you can lead the player, and then you can reward the player for doing something out of the norm.
So in that case, do collectibles have to be mandatory to obtain for the player?
They do not.
No, that when I mentioned the one in the flow chart, I had 5 in there to lay them out just to give the player some type of requirement, and they don't necessarily need to be. If you just want to have the ones in your flow chart be like your big setups or like the challenging ones to actually obtain, that's okay. But there does need to be some type of goal, right? So you don't want the player to just be able to get through your level, skip the task, and then they get to, they get to the end and there's nothing preventing them from moving forward. So you still want there to be some type of objective, whether that is collectibles or, some type of rigid bodies that you use with the grab null. That's totally up to you. But we do want there to be 15 collectibles, and try and come up with different ways, like we've been mentioning, of placing those to, lead the player, have those hidden ones, and reward them for doing different tasks. One of my favorites as well is using them to tease the player and really dangle a carrot for them. Definitely Crackdown was one of my favorite games that I mentioned previously, that really you'd see the collectible way up there and you're just like, okay, how do I get it? That's the kind of stuff that we definitely want to see. And here's a really good example of that too. So up here we have one on that diving board up there, right? So maybe that staircase was broken, or there's some setup where you have to put the staircase together, but you see that up there and you're like, okay, how do I get that collectible? That's the type of stuff, another way to use those setups. So like this is definitely what we don't want to see, right? You just come over here and like, oh, all right, I got my 15 collectibles. These ones over here, definitely much more of a way to lead the player, right? So maybe you have these platforms and it leads up to somewhere and it's actually part of the progression. So I'm progressing and now I'm just collecting these, and this is just rewarding the player for progressing, right? So then it's about balancing, using these different elements to make it feel like it's a variety and there's some progression, and you're using the skills that you've learned previously to push forward. So it's definitely a lot goes with pacing and just placement, right? So it's not like it's very complicated to move an object from one place to another, but it takes thought and iteration to get it just right.
So, mandatory items that the player needs to progress, are those considered collectibles?
Up to you.
That's totally up to you.
What would you, like, if I wanted to make a bomb or something like that to blow up a wall to progress, would
Yeah.
parts be considered
Sure.
collectibles for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely it could be, they collect items and then you put it together. It can be a combination of using the items and then you using a rigid body as well, right? So maybe there's um, some type of workbench. You have to go out and collect 3 or 4 different items. You come to this workbench, you interact with something, it actually like spawns in this bomb that's a rigid body. You carry it with the grab over to the door, it explodes, right? So that's using both mechanics. It's using the collectible element as well as the grab and the rigid bodies to tie everything together. So, but yeah, entirely up to you how you want to go, how you want to do so. It's definitely functionality is the top priority. So don't try and design something too complex. Just keep it within the scope of your own abilities.
You can also see, you thought 15 was a lot. I think there are like, what, 12 of these blue ones?
Yeah, there's 9 of each.
Yeah, okay, so there's 9 of those blue ones hidden in that small space you can see right there.
Yeah,
Fine.
and the question mark ones are the gold ones those are the ones that have been secretly hidden. So like here's one in the water.
So just in this very small space, we have 28 hidden, while the green ones are not.
Yeah, the green ones were just out there. They weren't anything
There are
special.
18 between the blue and the gold, and they're all hidden in very.
You would consider those blue ones good collectibles?
Yeah, I think they're fine. Yeah, because you're doing a little task. It's not much. You're just jumping from one platform to the next, but you're doing, and you're leading the player, especially if those blue ones that jump led to something further,
Mm-hmm.
and you're guiding the player jump to jump to jump. Then,
Yeah.
That's absolutely great.
Yeah, because one thing to keep in mind here is that we're not doing anything. There's no level here. This is just a little testing ground for mechanics and just being able to introduce you guys to the level blocking meshes and the whole project template. So there's no progression to this, but yeah, like we've been mentioning, this could be very well be a platforming element where there's some type of hazard below me, or I have to go forward to do so. But yeah, this is definitely a good spacing. and good pacing for the collectibles. And do you think, I mean, I'm okay with having more than 15. You think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you want to have more than 15, it's okay. But yeah, that definitely goes with what we've been saying with pacing. You don't just want to put 20 all on the ground in one room. You go into the next room and there's 20 more, right? It's using them in a way to lead the player and to progress.
You can also mix it up as well. Like a very common thing that we see is there's a dead body and it's got a stick of dynamite, a bottle of water, and a note by this dead body. So they've set up this little scene.
Yeah.
Obviously, this guy was like, he died, but he was trying to do something with this dynamite. And then you go up to it and you collect all three. So you get credit for three. But it makes sense. It's not just a pile.
Yeah.
You get the water. That makes intuitive sense. You get the dynamite, and the note says, "I need to use this dynamite to clear the rubble out." So like all of it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's telling a story,
It's
right?
telling the story with the collectibles and giving you three collectibles all in the same place. So and leading you through to the next thing. So that's really good design.
So in that instance, did the player have to do anything mechanically to find the body, or like was it kind of hidden? Or?
It could be or could not be. It could be up on a ledge. It could be something like you get a door unlocked or pry a door off. That's a really common one.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you just if you put a rigid body on a door and lean it up against a doorway, that's mechanic. The player needs to see that. They need to see that gap. Use the grabnel to pull the door off, and then there's the body behind it. Like, oh, this guy couldn't make it out. He was trapped. If the door's pinned from the other side, then there's like this whole story built into it that the player gets out of it. It's really cool stuff.
Any other questions at all? I was going to give you guys a short break before we continue on. But any other questions about the flow chart and the map and what you're going to do turning your LDD into the flow chart and then the map? No? All right. So yeah, let's take a short little break and then we'll come back and go over a little bit of Perforce review. And yeah, that should about do it. So let's take a 15-minute break.